Daniel had never been inside a music academy before. He had walked past its tall glass doors many times, usually on his way home from school or from the grocery store where he worked part-time. But the idea of stepping inside always felt like something meant for other people who lived in bigger houses, who had lessons, who owned shiny things. But today, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, he found himself standing right inside the lobby, clutching a thin audition form and a folded piece of sheet music that had been copied so many times. The ink looked faded, the lobby was bright and polished. The walls had pictures of young performers smiling beside trophies and awards. Every face looked confident, like they knew they belonged there. Daniel felt the opposite. His heart kept beating too fast, and he wondered if the people passing by could hear it. He tried to breathe slowly, but the nervousness kept climbing up his chest. He had arrived earlier than needed, partly because he didn't want to rush and partly because he didn't know what else to do with himself. He kept looking around at the students warming up, their fingers flying across the piano keys in the side rooms. Some sat in small circles, chatting and laughing softly as if the audition was nothing more than another practice session. Their clothes were tidy, their backpacks looked expensive, and their fingers looked practiced. Daniel looked at his own hands, slightly rough, with a small burn mark on one finger from reheating soup the night before. He tucked them into his pockets. He didn't want anyone to think he didn't belong here. Even though the thought sat heavy in his mind, a woman at the registration table called the next person, and he stepped forward when she read his number. She smiled politely, took his form, checked his identification, and handed him a small card with a number printed on it. He thanked her quietly, trying to sound calm even though his voice shook a little. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, but chose not to react. Either way, he appreciated that she didn't make him feel more nervous. He sat down on one of the plastic chairs near the hallway and looked around again. Two boys were practicing scales on the piano across the hall. One of them kept glancing at Daniel with a curious expression, then whispered something to his friend. The friend looked too, but then shrugged and went back to his playing. Daniel hoped it meant nothing, but he felt the familiar sting of being seen as less than. It wasn't new. It had happened many times at school, at work, even in the grocery store when someone heard him humming near the shelves. People just didn't expect much from him. He couldn't blame them. He had no training, no certificates, no teacher guiding him. All he had was an old piano, one that belonged to his grandfather, who used to play every evening until dinner. Those were some of Daniel's earliest memories, sitting beside the piano bench, legs swinging, listening to the warm sounds filling their small living room. His grandfather never forced him to learn. He just played, and Daniel watched until slowly, naturally, he started to understand the keys and the sounds they made. When his grandfather passed away, the piano became Daniel's. It wasn't in perfect condition, several keys stuck sometimes, and one pedal squeaked, but to Daniel, it felt alive, like it carried his grandfather's spirit inside. He spent years playing it in secret, filling the quiet rooms of his home late at night when no one else was awake. It wasn't about being the best. It wasn't even about becoming good. It was the only thing that made him feel like he truly belonged somewhere. So how did he end up at an audition for a music academy? That part still confused him. A week ago, while he was playing at home, a neighbor had heard him through the window. She was an older lady who lived 2 houses down. She had knocked gently and told him that his music made her evening peaceful. She had asked where he learned, and when he admitted he learned on his own, she seemed shocked. The next day, she dropped off a small pamphlet for the Academy's scholarship auditions. "You should try," she had said. "There's something in the way you play, something rare." Daniel didn't believe her, not really, but something about her voice felt sincere. He kept the pamphlet on his desk for a few days, glancing at it every so often. Eventually, he filled out the form with slow, hesitant strokes, as if giving himself time to change his mind, but he never did. Maybe he felt he owed it to his grandfather. Maybe he just wanted to know what it felt like to try. Now, sitting in the lobby with his number card, he wondered if he had made a mistake. The academy looked bigger than he imagined, the other students more experienced, the atmosphere heavier. He swallowed hard and tried to shift his attention to the sheet of music in his hand. It was a simple piece, one that the academy had required for all applicants. He knew it well enough, having practiced it every night for the past week. He knew how to play it. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that the judges would expect a certain style, something precise, practiced, polished. Daniel had never been trained to play like that. He only knew how to play the way he felt, and he wasn't sure if that would be seen as talent or as a flaw. A door opened down the hallway. A tall man stepped out, holding a clipboard. He called a number, and the boy across the hall stood up, wiped his palms on his pants, and walked inside. Daniel watched the door close behind him, then looked around. Several other students turned their heads toward the sound, some whispering excitedly. The tall man scanned the list on his clipboard again. He looked experienced, maybe even strict. His expression barely changed as he moved down the hallway. Daniel tried not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing the man's posture and the way he walked. People who were good at their jobs had a certain rhythm to them, and this man had it. It intimidated Daniel, but it also made him wonder what kind of people judged auditions like this. The boy who went inside earlier reappeared a few minutes later, looking somewhat relieved but also unsure. His friend hurried over to ask how it went, and the boy just shrugged. "Okay, I guess," he said quietly. They didn't say much. Daniel wished he could ask what the room looked like, or how many judges sat inside, or how close they sat to the piano. He didn't ask, though. He didn't want to draw attention. More numbers were called. More students went in and came out. Some looked confident, others looked disappointed. Daniel's stomach twisted more each time the door opened. Finally, the tall man stepped into the hallway again. He looked at the list on the clipboard, then called Daniel's number. Daniel felt his breath catch. His legs felt suddenly too light, like they might float away. He stood carefully, hoping no one would notice the way his knees shook. He held the sheet music tightly, almost too tightly, and walked toward the man. The tall man gave him a short nod, not unfriendly, but not warm either. Something neutral, something professional. "This way," he said. Daniel followed him down the hallway. The sound of pianos playing behind closed doors echoed faintly, blending into a soft, floating mix of notes. It made him even more aware of each step he took. As they reached the last door on the right, the tall man opened it halfway and motioned inside. Daniel stepped through. The room was brighter than he expected. Sunlight came in through tall windows on one side, casting long beams across the floor. There were 3 judges seated behind a table, each with a notepad and pen. A camera stood on a tripod in the corner, recording the auditions. A grand piano sat in the center of the room, polished and shining. The judge sitting in the middle glanced briefly at Daniel's clothes, then at the sheet in his hand. He raised an eyebrow slightly, though he quickly masked the expression with a polite smile. "You may begin with the basic audition piece," he said, his tone calm but distant. "Whenever you're ready." There it was, that gentle but unmistakable signal that they didn't expect much. Daniel had heard that tone before from teachers, supervisors, and even strangers. It wasn't rude. It wasn't insulting. It was simply a tone that belonged to people who assumed they already knew the outcome. Daniel nodded quietly. He walked toward the piano and sat down. The bench felt different from his grandfather's, smoother, steadier, newer. He placed his hands on his lap for a moment, letting himself breathe. He looked at the keys, shining under the light. He didn't feel ready. He also knew he wouldn't ever truly feel ready. But he was here now, and he had to play. He lifted his hands slowly and placed them on the keys. The room grew quiet, and as he took his first breath before playing, something inside him shifted. Not confidence, not certainty, but something calmer. Something that felt like his grandfather was sitting beside him again, just like the old days. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then he pressed the first note. When the first note left the piano, it was soft, almost too soft, like Daniel was testing the air around him. The sound floated gently into the room, and for a moment, it felt as if time had slowed down just enough for him to breathe. His fingers moved to the next notes, each one falling into place the way he had practiced so many times at home. The piano felt different from his grandfather's old one, but somehow the touch of the keys felt familiar enough to guide him. At first, the judges didn't react much. They kept their eyes on their papers, ready to mark the usual notes they wrote for beginners. Needs improvement, inconsistent timing, uncertain touch. They had heard this basic audition piece countless times throughout the day, sometimes rushed, sometimes stiff, sometimes correct but empty. They expected something similar from him. But as Daniel continued, something subtle changed. The judge sitting on the left looked up from her notes. She lifted her head slowly, as if unsure whether what she heard was really different or she was imagining it. She watched Daniel's hands, noticing how he didn't just press the keys, he shaped the sound. It was the kind of detail only someone who cared deeply about music would naturally do. The middle judge, who earlier had spoken in that polite, predictable tone, shifted in his seat. He narrowed his eyes just slightly, leaning forward a little. The judge on the right paused his pen in midair. None of them said anything, but their silence grew sharper, more focused. Daniel didn't notice any of it. He didn't notice the judges staring at him now. He didn't notice the stillness of the room. He didn't notice the tall man with the clipboard standing near the wall, watching with raised eyebrows. He only noticed the keys. The simple notes of the basic piece echoed in his memory how he learned it by feeling, not by strict instructions. He remembered playing it late one night at home, when the electricity went out and the house was quiet except for the soft creaking sounds of the old wooden floor. He had lit a small candle and played until the flame flickered out. That moment stayed with him, and now, as he played inside this bright, polished room, he didn't try to copy anyone else. He played it the way it felt right to him. Each note seemed to breathe differently under his fingers. He stretched some moments longer than usual, allowing the sound to settle before moving on. He softened the melody where most people kept it plain. He let certain phrases float a little, adding a gentle rise and fall that made the room feel warmer. The basic audition piece, which normally sounded like a simple exercise, began to take on a quiet beauty. The judges exchanged quick glances, the kind that said without words, "Are you hearing this too?" The middle judge lifted his pen again, but this time not to write the usual comments. Instead, he wrote one word, something short, something curious. Then he looked back at Daniel, studying the way the boy's face stayed calm yet focused, how his shoulders relaxed the more he played, how he leaned slightly toward the keys as if listening to them more than playing them. Daniel wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to stand out. He wasn't trying to prove he belonged. He just played the way he always played at home, letting the sound guide him, trusting his instincts even when he didn't fully understand them. Halfway through the piece, his left hand brushed across the lower keys with a softness that surprised even him. He could feel his breathing match the rhythm of the music. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He wasn't in a bright room with judges watching him. He wasn't in a music academy surrounded by students who had years of training. He wasn't even auditioning. He was just a boy sitting at a piano, doing the one thing that made sense in his world. A girl waiting outside the audition room had her ear pressed against the door. She had heard the other students play earlier, but this sounded different. "Who's playing right now?" she whispered to another student standing beside her. He shrugged. "Maybe someone who practiced more than us," he joked, though he sounded unsure. Inside the room, the left judge folded her hands together, her eyes softening. She didn't smile. Judges were trained not to, but something in her expression shifted. She recognized sincerity when she heard it. Not perfection, not technique, just sincerity. The judge on the right finally set his pen down. He didn't even pretend to take notes anymore. He watched closely, trying to guess where Daniel learned to play that way. There was clearly no formal training behind it. Formal training was precise and controlled, not loose and expressive. But there was something honest in the way Daniel played, a rawness that couldn't be taught. As the piece reached its quieter section, Daniel's fingers slowed. He let the notes ring just a fraction longer than expected. The judges could hear the emotion behind it, something gentle yet heavy, like warmth mixed with longing. They didn't know his story, but they could feel something personal in the music. The tall man with the clipboard slowly crossed his arms. He had heard good auditions today, some even excellent, but none like this. He stared at Daniel with a puzzled expression, as if trying to figure out how someone who walked in looking so unsure could sound like this at the piano. Daniel finished the last phrase with a softness that made the room feel still again. He let his hands rest lightly on the keys for a second before lifting them. The final note faded slowly, gently, as if taking its time to say goodbye. Then the room fell silent. Daniel kept his eyes focused on the keys, afraid to look up too quickly. His heart beat fast, but not from nerves, not exactly. It was something else, something like relief. He had played the way he wanted to, without holding back or worrying about expectations. No matter what happened next, he felt thankful that he hadn't let fear stop him. The judge in the middle finally cleared his throat. The sound felt too loud in the quiet room. He glanced at the other judges, then looked at Daniel again. "Thank you," he said slowly. His voice no longer sounded routine or distant. It had changed, warmer, almost thoughtful. Daniel nodded, unsure what the tone meant. The left judge leaned slightly forward. "Did you learn this piece from someone?" she asked gently. Daniel blinked. "No, I just practiced it at home, from the sheet." He didn't mention his grandfather. He wasn't sure if it mattered. The judge on the right tilted his head. "Do you practice often?" Daniel hesitated. "When I can," he said simply. The judges looked at each other again. Something unspoken passed between them. Something curious. Something surprised. The middle judge tapped his pen softly. An unusual gesture for someone usually reserved. "Your interpretation is unique," he said carefully. "Very different from what we usually hear." Daniel wasn't sure if that was good or bad. He swallowed, unsure if he should respond or stay silent. Before he could figure it out, the tall man with the clipboard walked over. He stood behind Daniel, studying him for a long moment. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. Daniel looked down at his hands. "Since I was little," he said quietly. "Just at home." The man nodded slowly, thoughtfully. The judges whispered quietly among themselves. Though Daniel couldn't hear what they said, he only caught small phrases like natural sensitivity, untrained but expressive, and unexpected. He didn't understand what any of it meant. He didn't know if they liked his playing or if they were confused by it. His stomach twisted again, the nervousness returning now that he wasn't playing anymore. Finally, the middle judge looked up again. "That will be all for now," he said gently. "You may step outside. We will call you when the results are ready." Daniel stood, feeling the weight return to his legs. He nodded politely and walked toward the door, trying to keep his footsteps steady. He wanted to turn around and read their faces again, but he didn't. He didn't want to try guessing. When he stepped out into the hallway, the students waiting looked up at him. The girl who had her ear pressed to the door earlier stared at him with wide eyes. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. Her expression already told the story. Whatever she heard, it wasn't what she expected. Daniel walked to the same chair he had been sitting in earlier. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't know what the judges thought. He didn't know if he had impressed them or confused them. He didn't know if he'd made a mistake or done something right. All he knew was that the room felt different now, and so did he. When Daniel stepped back into the hallway, the light felt brighter than before. Maybe it was just his eyes adjusting after spending time in the audition room. Or maybe it was because he still felt the sound of the last note echoing inside him. He wasn't sure. He sat down in the same chair he had been in earlier, the number card still clutched lightly in his hand, now a little creased from how tightly he held it before. The hallway was quieter now. Some students had already finished and left, and others were waiting for their turn with the kind of nervous energy he knew too well. A few whispered about their auditions, comparing mistakes, hoping they did well enough. Daniel listened without meaning to, their voices drifting in and out like background noise. The girl who had been leaning against the door earlier kept glancing at him, not in a rude way, just curious. She whispered something to the person next to her, and they both turned their heads slightly toward Daniel. He looked away and pretended to study the floor. He was used to people whispering around him, but this felt different. Not the kind of whispering that comes from expecting someone to fail, more like trying to understand something they didn't expect. As the minutes passed, Daniel's earlier calm began to fade. The reality of what he had done started to settle in. He had gone into that room with no expectations. He just wanted to get through the piece without shaking too much. But now he wasn't sure what would happen next. The judges hadn't reacted the way he expected. Their faces gave nothing away, but their eyes had changed while he played. He didn't know how to interpret that. He pressed his thumb against the edge of his number card. The paper bent slightly. He wanted to know what they had written down. He wanted to know if he had done something wrong, or something right, or something strange that didn't fit their usual standards. The uncertainty tied a tight knot in his stomach. Through the door, faint sounds of another student's audition drifted out. Their playing was clean, correct, and steady. It sounded like someone who had practiced 4 years with a teacher guiding their every movement. Daniel listened quietly, comparing it to his own playing. He didn't know if one was better than the other. They were simply different. And yet, he feared that different might not be enough. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his mind. He remembered his grandfather's small living room, the chipped vase by the window, the quiet hum of the old refrigerator, and the way the sunlight fell across the piano keys in the afternoon. Those memories always made him feel safe, even now. He took a slow breath and let himself picture them clearly. The door opened again, and the tall man with the clipboard stepped out. He called another number, and the next student stood and walked in. Daniel kept his eyes on the floor, but he could feel the man's glance pass over him briefly. Not cold, not unkind, but observing. Time passed slowly, too slowly. Minutes felt like long stretches of waiting and thinking, the kind that made the mind wander in uncomfortable directions. Daniel wondered if the judges were discussing him, wondered if they were confused by his playing, wondered if they were writing something down that would decide everything finally. After what felt like nearly an hour, the tall man appeared again. This time, he didn't call a number. Instead, he looked around the hallway and said in a calm voice, "Please stay close. We will announce results soon." The students exchanged glances. Some straightened their backs. Others tried to look relaxed, but couldn't quite hide the nervous shifting of their hands or feet. Daniel's heart tightened. This was it. Everything he had done in that room, every note, every breath, every small decision was now out of his hands. A few moments later, one of the assistants opened the audition room door wide. Students gathered around, forming a small, hesitant cluster near the entrance. The tall man stepped aside as the three judges walked out together. Their notepads were neatly stacked in the hands of the middle judge, who looked more thoughtful than before. The hallway fell into a hush. Even the students who had been whispering earlier stood quietly now, waiting. The middle judge cleared his throat lightly. "Thank you all for your patience," he began. His voice was steady and formal, but there was a slight warmth in it, a gentle tone that had been missing earlier when he spoke to the room one by one. "We are grateful for your efforts and the time you took to prepare." He paused, glancing over the group of students. His eyes passed over Daniel briefly before continuing. "We have selected a small number of candidates who will be invited into the academy for further evaluation and training. These selections are based on various qualities: musical skill, interpretation, potential, and dedication." The left judge unfolded a small sheet of paper and held it in her hand. She looked at the middle judge, who nodded slightly. She began reading the first few named students, whose faces brightened. As soon as they heard their number, they stepped forward, relieved, smiling at each other. Daniel watched quietly, his hands resting in his lap. His number card felt heavier now, as if the weight of every possibility was tucked inside the thin paper. More numbers were called. Daniel heard clapping from a few parents standing nearby, and soft congratulations whispered among friends. Each new number chipped away at the quiet space he held inside himself. The left judge reached the last few numbers on the list. Her voice remained calm, but Daniel sensed a small shift in her tone, not excitement, but something like anticipation. She read the next number. Not his. She read another. Still not his. Then, after a small pause, she read one more. And number 42. Daniel froze. That was his number. For a moment, he didn't move. Not because he didn't hear it, but because he wasn't sure he had heard it correctly. His heart skipped, then thudded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He lifted his eyes slowly, stunned, and saw the left judge looking at the group. Her gaze calm but steady. The students around him glanced at him, some surprised, some neutral. A few looked quietly impressed, though they tried to hide it. Daniel stood carefully, almost afraid his legs wouldn't support him. He walked toward the front, where the selected students gathered. He didn't smile. He didn't even know how to react. He just felt this strange mix of disbelief and relief swirling inside him. The middle judge nodded to the group. "Congratulations. You have been chosen to move on to the next stage. More instructions will be given shortly." One of the selected students whispered to Daniel, "You're playing." I heard it through the door. It didn't sound like the rest of us. It was different. There was no sarcasm in his voice, just honesty. Daniel nodded quietly, but didn't know what to say. He still felt like he was standing inside a moment he didn't fully understand. The judges stepped aside to speak privately with the tall man. Their voices were low but intent. The tall man kept glancing at Daniel with a thoughtful expression, as if replaying something in his mind. When the judges approached the selected group again, the left judge addressed them softly. "You were chosen because you each showed something meaningful today. Some of you showed strong technique, some showed discipline, and some," her eyes lingered briefly on Daniel, "some showed natural instinct, something that cannot be taught but can be shaped." Daniel's breath caught. He didn't know if she meant him specifically, but the look in her eyes made him feel like she did. The judge on the right added, "This next stage will be more difficult. We will need to see not only what you can do, but how you grow when challenged." The selected students nodded. Daniel did too, though his thoughts were still tangled with disbelief. When the judges dismissed them for a short break, Daniel stepped out into the fresh air outside the building. He needed space, needed a moment to understand what had just happened. The air felt cool against his face as he sat on a bench near the entrance. He stared at his number card, creased, worn, but suddenly meaningful in a way he never imagined. He had walked into the academy expecting to be overlooked. Instead, He had been really seen. And something inside him felt like it had shifted forever. Daniel stayed outside for a little while, letting the cool air touch his face and calm the thoughts racing in his mind. The sounds from inside the building felt distant, the voices, the echoing footsteps, the low hum of conversations blending together. Out here, he could breathe without feeling the weight of every eye on him. He kept looking at his number card, turning it over slowly between his fingers. It was strange how something so small could suddenly feel so important. When he had first received it, it meant nothing more than his place in the line. But now it felt like a key, maybe not a key that opened a door completely, but at least one that unlocked a tiny crack of possibility. He sat quietly, watching a group of birds hop around near the edge of the walkway. Their calm movements made him feel a little lighter. The air smelled faintly of damp grass, and a soft breeze pushed a few leaves across the ground. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. But that peace didn't last long. The tall man with the clipboard stepped out of the building and looked around. When he spotted Daniel, he walked over with steady steps. "There you are," he said gently. "The judges want all selected candidates to gather in the practice hall in a few minutes." Daniel nodded quickly and stood up, slipping the number card into his pocket. His heart started beating faster again, even though he tried to keep his expression calm. The tall man gave him a thoughtful look before turning back toward the door. His expression wasn't cold, not even strict. It was curious, as if he was trying to figure out a puzzle that didn't make sense yet. Daniel followed him inside, feeling the warmth of the building wrap around him again. The hallway was filled with soft chatter as the chosen students gathered near the practice hall doors. A few glanced at Daniel again, some with quiet respect, others with lingering curiosity. Inside the practice hall, rows of chairs were arranged in a semicircle. 3 pianos stood at the front of the room, 1 grand piano and 2 uprights. The grand piano looked almost unreal, as if it belonged in some grand concert hall instead of a schoolroom. Its polished black surface reflected the overhead lights, and its open lid made it look powerful and waiting. The selected students took their seats, spreading out across the room. Daniel took a chair near the middle, not too close to the front, but not hiding either. He folded his hands in his lap, trying not to fidget. The judges entered a moment later, carrying clipboards and folders. Their expressions were serious, but not unfriendly. The left judge smiled softly as she looked over the students, though her smile was subtle and brief. The middle judge set his folder on a small table near the piano and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for waiting," he began. "This next stage is not an audition. It is more of a deeper look into your musical understanding and abilities." He looked around the room, making sure everyone was listening. "We want to see how you respond to guidance, how you interpret something new, and most importantly, how you connect with the instrument." Daniel felt his chest tighten with both excitement and fear. He had never been evaluated like this before. Everything he knew came from experimenting at home, trying things until they felt right. He didn't know if that would hold up under real instruction. The right judge stepped forward. "We will call you one by one," he said. "You will play a short piece of your choosing, anything you feel comfortable with. After that, we may ask you to adjust your style or try something slightly different." He looked directly at Daniel for a brief moment, not unkindly, but with a seriousness that made Daniel swallow nervously. The judges called the first student. A boy with neat hair and confident posture stood and walked to the piano. He played a complicated piece, full of fast runs and strong chords. It sounded impressive, like someone who had practiced that exact piece for months. The judges nodded, wrote a few notes, and asked him to soften certain sections. He adjusted quickly, clearly trained to follow instructions. Next came a girl with calm eyes and steady hands. She played something gentle and lyrical. Her touch was controlled, though a little stiff. The judges guided her through, adding more expression, and she improved noticeably. One by one, students walked up and played. Some were strong technically, others expressive but uncertain. The judges gave each of them different forms of feedback. With every performance, Daniel's heart beat a little faster. He tried to memorize each judge's reactions, hoping he could learn something before it was his turn. But at the same time, his mind kept drifting back to his grandfather's piano, the chipped wood, the uneven keys, the warm, dusty smell that filled the house. When the middle judge finally said, "Number 42, Daniel felt his breath catch. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then he stood, steadying himself before taking each step toward the grand piano. The chair near the piano felt surprisingly smooth beneath him. His hands hovered above the keys, but he didn't touch them yet. He looked up once, seeing the judges watching closely, not harshly, not impatiently, but fully attentive. "What would you like to play?" the left judge asked softly. Daniel swallowed. "Something I practiced at home," he said. His voice was quiet, but steady enough. "Go ahead," the middle judge replied. Daniel placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes felt unfamiliar, not the sound, but the touch. The grand piano's keys were heavier than his old piano at home. They responded differently, requiring a little more effort, but offering a deeper, richer tone in return. He adjusted instinctively, listening to how the notes reacted to his hands. He started with a simple melody, something slow, gentle, and warm. It wasn't from a famous composer. It wasn't something he learned from a teacher. It was something he had created one evening without thinking too much, letting his hands wander until they found a pattern that felt comforting. The sound filled the room in a way he hadn't expected. Grand pianos had a way of carrying emotion in their notes, and the melody suddenly felt bigger, deeper, more honest. Daniel let the music flow the way it always did at home, letting one phrase lead into the next, letting his left hand support the melody with soft chords. The judges leaned forward. Slightly, the middle judge's pencil stopped moving. The right judge's expression softened just a little. The left judge's eyes shimmered with quiet interest. Daniel didn't see any of this. He was lost in the sound, letting the piano guide him. The melody grew subtly, shifting into a slightly more emotional section. His touch became lighter, then heavier, then gentle again. He didn't plan it. He never planned anything when he played. He simply followed what felt right. When he reached the final few notes, he let them fade naturally, giving them room to breathe. The room fell into silence again. Daniel lifted his hands and rested them on his lap. His heart thumped loudly in his chest. None of the judges spoke at first. Finally, the left judge broke the silence. "Did you compose that yourself?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I think so. I didn't write it down. I just play it when I feel like it." The judges exchanged glances, not confused ones this time, but impressed ones. The right judge stepped closer. "Daniel," he said gently, "would you be willing to play that again? But this time, try it a little slower in the middle section?" Daniel blinked. "Slower?" "Yes," the judge nodded. "Not much. Just enough to let the melody linger a little longer." Daniel took a quiet breath, placed his hands on the keys again, and began. This time, he made the middle section slightly slower, allowing the notes to stretch. As he played, he could feel the difference. It gave the melody more weight, more emotion, almost like letting a memory linger before letting it go. The judges watched in complete silence until he finished. The middle judge finally nodded. "Beautiful," he said quietly. "Very beautiful." Daniel stared at the keys, unsure how to respond. The left judge leaned forward, her voice soft. "You have a rare way of connecting with the instrument," she said. "It's not taught. It comes from feeling." Daniel's chest tightened, warm, nervous, grateful all at once. The right judge added, "Your technique is untrained, yes, but your instinct, that cannot be taught easily." For the first time that day, Daniel felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since walking into the academy. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind built on wishful thinking, but the kind built on being seen. The judges dismissed him with gentle nods, and Daniel walked back to his seat slowly, his heart still racing. His legs felt light, almost shaky, but not from fear this time, from something else, something brighter. When he sat down, a couple of the other students looked at him with a different kind of expression now, not pity, not curiosity, but genuine respect. Daniel didn't know what the judges would decide at the end. He didn't know where this opportunity would lead, but he knew one thing clearly. He had played honestly. He had played from the deepest part of himself, and for the first time in his life, that had been enough to make a room full of trained ears stop and truly listen. When the last note faded into the air, the whole room stayed completely silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from boredom or confusion. It was the kind that happens only when people witness something so unexpected, so moving, that their minds need a moment to catch up. Every person in that audition hall seemed frozen in place, almost as if someone had hit pause on the world. The young boy sitting at the piano didn't move either. He kept his hands resting lightly on the keys, unsure if he had made a mistake or done something wrong. For a moment, he wondered if he had played too much or gone too far. No one had told him if he was allowed to add his own variations, and he didn't know the rules of professional auditions. He only knew what felt honest in his heart. He slowly lifted his hands from the piano, letting them fall onto his lap. His breathing was gentle but unsteady. He didn't dare turn to face the judges yet. He didn't know what expression he would find on their faces: disappointment, confusion, or maybe even irritation. After all, he was only supposed to play the basic audition piece, nothing more. But something inside him had pushed him to go further, to pour himself into the music the way he always had, when he practiced alone in his small living room. Before he could gather the courage to look up, a sound broke the silence. It was a single clap, then another, and then, all at once, the entire room exploded into applause. The boy's shoulders jerked slightly, startled. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected anything close to this. The applause grew louder, filling every corner of the hall. Even some of the students who had laughed earlier were on their feet. The young boy finally turned, and what he saw made his chest tighten. People weren't just clapping, they were smiling, wide and genuine, the kind of smiles people give only when they're deeply moved. One of the judges, an older man with silver hair and thoughtful eyes, stood up from the panel. He wasn't smiling in the way the others were. Instead, he looked stunned, almost shaken. He pressed both palms on the table as if steadying himself before stepping forward. The boy's heart thumped harder. He didn't know what to expect from this man. The judge's face was serious, and for a second, the boy feared that maybe he had broken some important rule. Maybe the applause was from the audience, but the professionals weren't pleased. But then the older man walked closer, stopping right in front of him. He took a slow breath, the kind someone takes when they're trying to steady overwhelming emotions. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked softly, almost in disbelief. The boy lowered his eyes. "No one," he said in a quiet voice. "I just learned at home. My grandpa used to show me little things, but he passed away years ago. I just kept playing." The older man blinked, as if those words had hit him with more force than he expected. Behind him, the other judges exchanged looks, surprised, impressed, even a little confused. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the level of skill they had just witnessed. It didn't seem possible that someone could teach himself something so technical and emotional without guidance. "You played with depth," the judge said, his voice steady now. "Not just skill, depth, the kind that can't be taught easily, not even by the best teachers." The boy felt his cheeks warm. He wasn't used to compliments, especially ones that sounded so big and heavy. He looked down at his hands, noticing the slight tremble in his fingers. It was finally sinking in that something extraordinary had happened. Another judge approached, this one younger, with glasses and an excited expression. "Those variations you added," he said. "Did you write them yourself?" The boy hesitated. I don't know if you would call it writing. I just play what I feel when the melody starts to change in my head." The younger judge's eyes widened. "That's even more impressive." Slowly, the applause faded so the judges could speak clearly. The hall quieted again, but this time the silence felt warm and joyful, not heavy or uncertain. One of the academy staff members stepped forward and whispered something to the judges. They nodded, and then the older judge addressed the boy once more. "We would like to offer you full admission to this academy," he said. The boy blinked. "Full admission?" "Yes," the man said. "You don't need to audition further. We have seen enough to know you belong here." The boy felt the air leave his chest in a shaky breath. He had come to this audition with a simple hope to at least be considered, maybe placed in a beginner class if he was lucky. He never imagined this. He never imagined the judges would see something special in him, something worth nurturing. Another judge added, "We also want to offer you a mentorship program. You'll be guided by some of our top instructors. You have rare talent, natural and powerful. With proper training, you can grow even further." These words didn't feel real. They sounded like something from a dream he had never allowed himself to dream too deeply because he didn't think it was possible. He swallowed, trying to speak, but the words got stuck. All he managed was a quiet, "Thank you. I don't know what to say." One of the judges smiled. "Just keep playing the way you played today. That is more than enough." After they finished speaking, the audition room buzzed with excitement. Students gathered near the boy, not with laughter now, but with admiration. Some asked how long he had been playing. Others asked if he had any recordings. A few even asked if he could teach them little tricks or techniques. The boy felt shy under all this attention, but he answered politely, surprised by how kind everyone suddenly was. On the edge of the room, a few parents who had come with other students watched him with warm expressions. They whispered to each other, impressed by how someone so young could create something that touched everyone so deeply. Even those who had come expecting only to support their own children now found themselves rooting for this quiet boy with incredible talent. Slowly, The tension that had lived inside him for so long began to loosen. For the first time, he felt seen, not judged, not dismissed, not underestimated, seen, truly seen. When the crowd eventually thinned, the academy staff gave him some papers to fill out later and told him someone would guide him through the admission process. They reassured him that everything would be simple and clear, and he didn't need to worry about anything right now. As he stepped out of the audition hall into the cool afternoon air, he let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The sunlight felt brighter somehow, and the world seemed softer, warmer. He walked slowly down the steps of the academy building, still trying to make sense of everything. His hands still tingled from the performance, and his heart still beat with leftover adrenaline. He thought about all the days he had spent practicing alone, sitting in front of his old piano with chipped keys and fading polish. He remembered the quiet mornings, the late nights, the moments when music was the only thing that made him feel calm. He remembered how his grandfather would sit beside him when he was little, pointing to the keys with gentle patience. He remembered the stories his grandfather told him, the ones about how music could heal, comfort, and tell the truth of the heart without saying a single word. The boy smiled to himself. He wished his grandfather could have been there today, but in a way, he felt he was. The music he played came from everything his grandfather had given him, and maybe that was why the performance felt so powerful. Maybe the judges hadn't just heard notes, they had heard the love, memories, and dreams hidden inside those notes. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he sat on a bench for a moment, letting the breeze cool his warm cheeks. He opened his hands and looked at them again. These hands had carried him further than he ever imagined. They had opened doors he didn't think he could walk through, and now they would lead him into a new world, one filled with guidance, support, and opportunities he never thought he could have. As he sat there, a gentle thought came to him. This was just the beginning. The world of music was vast and full of places he had never seen or touched, but now he would have the chance to explore it. And he would do it with the same honesty he had shown on that piano bench today. He stood up with a quiet confidence that had never been there before. He felt ready not just to join the academy, but to grow, to learn, and to keep playing with the same heart that had stunned everyone in that room. And as he walked away, he carried with him the feeling that his life had changed, not because he had tried to impress anyone, but because he had simply allowed his true self to shine through the music he loved. It was the start of something new, something bright, something he could finally call his own.